Mom had a friend, he had an airplane, and he let me take over the controls once he took off, and Mom was on the passenger seat in the back. It was nice. It made me want to fly.
I'm Carol Sutton Lewis.
And I'm Katie Hafner. This is Season 3 of Lost Women of Science, the First Lady of Engineering.
This season, we're talking about the mechanical engineer Y.Y. Clark.
Y.Y. never did become a pilot, but in this episode, she'll discover the work that eventually became her life, mechanical engineering. And in a way, her journey was a kind of flight.
Mom did a paper that has the title 6 Degrees of Freedom.
That's Milton Clark, Y.Y.'s son. 6 Degrees of Freedom is a term used by engineers, and it's also the title of the book he's writing about his mother.
The 6 Degrees of Freedom title has to do with the ability of an object to move in free space. So if you think about an airplane,
it can move in 3 dimensions, or what an engineer would call
3 axes, X, Y, and Z.
You can move along each of the 3 axes, or you can rotate around each of the 3 axes.
And the technical terms are roll, pitch, and yaw.
3 plus 3 is 6.
So that's where the 6 degrees of freedom come from.
So an object can move with some freedom, some choice, but always within the limitations of the axes.
And in Mom's case, with her life and those challenges she had to roll, pitch, and yaw to get through some of those challenges.
In the last episode, we saw Y.Y. and her family do just that. She was admitted to the University of Louisville, but barred from enrollment because she was Black.
But after some negotiating by Y.Y.'s mother, the University of Louisville agreed to cover Y.Y.'s tuition at Howard University. And that's where Y.Y. started school in 1947. She decided to major in mechanical engineering.
Remember, Y.Y. wanted to be a pilot, and the pilots she knew had all studied engineering, so this was a track that made a lot of sense for her.
Carol, can we get a quick explainer on what exactly mechanical engineering is? What was she going to be studying?
I talked to Y.Y.'s former student, Dr. S. Keith Hargrove, who, like Y.Y., majored in mechanical engineering. He defines engineering in general as
the use of math and science to design and build things with available resources for the betterment of mankind.
Now, within that, there are different disciplines. Civil engineers work with buildings and infrastructure. Electrical engineers design circuitry and electrical equipment.
But mechanical engineering is focused on the design and operation of machines.
For Y.Y., this was a perfect fit. She'd been fixing appliances since she was a little girl, the broken toaster, the family's furnace. In one class, they were casting metal parts, and Y.Y. was put on a sanding assignment.
A sanding assignment?
Meaning I had to shovel the sand to make the molds to pour the metal in.
That's Y.Y. from a StoryCorps interview she did in 2007. Her decision to pursue mechanical engineering meant she could expect to work with heavy machinery. In the manufacturing lab, that meant physical labor. But Y.Y. made it work.
I didn't pick up a whole shovel of sand. I picked up enough that I could handle and not be sore when I finished class.
In her classes, more often than not, Y.Y. was the only woman. There were women in other engineering disciplines, but Y.Y. was the only woman in the mechanical engineering program. She thought it was because chemical and electrical engineering didn't have the stigma that mechanical engineering had. Mechanical engineers often work directly with machines, meaning they'd be dealing with grease and smoke from engines. They were seen as doing grittier, less refined work than their counterparts in other engineering fields. But as Y.Y. put it,
everything that you use, a machine made. And we as mechanical engineers design the machine to get what you all want designed.
Which means mechanical engineers were crucial to any engineering project.
When she was at Howard, Y.Y. was a serious, super focused student. But she did find time for extracurricular activity. During freshman year, Her roommate was trying out for the cheerleading team.
So I said, okay, I'll go with you.
Even though she'd never been on a cheerleading team, YY headed to the tryouts and
I made the cheering squad, and I never cheered in front of anybody in my life.
I love that image.
okay, I really do too. The mechanical engineer running a pep rally. She actually became the captain of the cheerleading squad. Her nickname on the team was Little Colonel because she was a bit of a drill sergeant.
Cheerleading was my release, but naturally I did have to study.
YY liked having structure, whether it was choreographing a routine on the football field or designing a machine according to the laws of physics. She liked knowing what the rules were.
According to Milton's biography, in college, YY even came up with rules for happiness. She told herself that in order to live a happy life, there were 3 things she would never do. Here are the 3 nevers. Number 1, never marry a tall man. YY called this a matter of simple physics. She was, quote, vertically challenged.
Meaning she was short.
And she wanted to be able to look her life partner eye to eye. Number 2, never become a teacher. A teacher's salary wouldn't be enough to buy a house and raise kids, things that she hoped to do in the near future. And number 3, never work for the government. In YY's words, government projects just seemed like they were more trouble than they were worth to me. So these were the 3 nevers.
Okay, so no tall man, no teaching, no government work. We're about to see YY become a bit of a renegade. She's going to break all her own rules.
I know. Let's go one by one, starting with never marry a tall man.
Mom and Dad had fun together.
That's Milton again, YY's son.
They both love big band. They both were huge Basie fans, Count Basie fans.
That might be because their very first dance was to a Count Basie tune. It was 1949, YY's junior year.
As a cheerleader, YY went to all of Howard's away games with the football team.
And one of those games was at Fisk University, a historically black college in Nashville. YY had some family there from her dad's side, and a cousin took her out to a party after the game, and that is where she met Bill Clark.
He came over and offered her some punch. And the first thing she noticed? How tall he was. 6'4" to her 5'3". Okay, wait a minute though. 5'3", that's not that short. But I guess when you stand next to someone who's 6'4", it seems pretty short.
Right. And they're not going to spend the rest of their lives sitting down so they can look each other in the eye.
Right.
According to her 3 nevers, Bill's height was a deal breaker. But they got to talking and dancing, and they hit it off. Bill was studying medicine and biochemistry. When YY told him that her major was mechanical engineering, she was ready for the usual disbelief.
But Bill said, "That's a bold choice. I'm sure you'll do well." From that first exchange, Bill made it clear that YY had his support. And it won her over. They started dating long distance. YY would head to Nashville on weekends and holiday breaks.
They were a power couple in that they knew each other's strengths. They relied on each other. Those strengths enhanced the dynamic between the two of them.
Milton thinks part of what shaped how Bill and YY related was Bill's upbringing. On the one hand, Bill's father did not approve of YY.
Dr. Clark was not pleased with Dad's choice at all. He did not think that a woman should have a career like Mom and made no bones about it.
In fact, Bill's parents divorced shortly after he was born, in part because his mother wanted to continue her career. She was a licensed psychologist.
Ultimately, Dad's mom ended up being Dean of Women at Texas Southern University.
Bill had grown up with a mother who had a career, and he had a wonderful relationship with her.
That really, I think, sets the stage for how he treated Mom. The fact that Dad respected Mom and what she was doing was huge.
YY continued to visit Bill as often as she could, but when school was in session, she was studying a lot.
Don't forget, she'd originally intended to become a pilot. Engineering was just a means to that end, but now, as she neared the end of her undergrad years, she decided to make mechanical engineering her career.
When YY was a senior, she went to the registrar's office to get a copy of her transcript, and an administrator told her that in graduating, she would become the
first female in the history of Howard University to finish mechanical engineering.
She knew she was the only woman in her class, but ever? This was news to YY, and she was proud of it. You would think that the university would celebrate too.
You would think so, but YY's daughter, Carol Lawson, told me that in 1951, when YY was getting ready to walk in commencement with the rest of her class, she was called into the Dean of Engineering's office. Some faculty were waiting for her, looking grim and serious, and they told her,
"She can't walk because she's a female."
That's Carol. She says the Dean of Engineering at Howard told her mother she wouldn't be able to participate in the graduation ceremonies.
And so she had to take her degree in the president's office.
Milton says the same thing in 6 Degrees of Freedom. But was there any concrete evidence of this? Could any documents confirm that YY was indeed denied the privilege of celebrating with her classmates at the commencement ceremony because of her gender?
At Lost Women of Science, we look for primary sources: correspondence, journal entries, drafts of papers, interview transcripts. All are key. They're our main sustenance. We spend a lot of time looking for these materials, not only because we want to get things right, but because we think part of our mission is to safeguard the papers that document a life, and to share these stories so they become part of our collective history. But the stories we tell are always limited by what we can find. In telling YY's story, we've had a lot of luck finding YY's family members and friends and colleagues, but very little luck finding primary source documentation. And while we've gotten to hear from YY herself, we don't have many of her personal papers.
So we went digging to find out what we could about YY's graduation. There's no doubt that she graduated. We've seen her diploma. Plus, there are several photos of her in the 1951 Howard University yearbook, and she's listed in that year's senior class directory. Howard certainly celebrated her achievement. Sonia Woods, the university archivist at Howard, sent us the 1951-1952 annual report from the School of Engineering and Architecture, which calls her our first woman graduate in mechanical engineering. But we could not find any record of Howard refusing to let her walk with her class because of her gender. And without primary source documentation, and that could be letters exchanged between Howard and the Youngs, or a list of graduates who did walk, some questions remain around the details of YY's graduation. What we do know is that Howard did recognize and document her achievement. And 10 years later, in 1962, she was profiled in the Alumni magazine. And what strikes us is that in some ways, this means YY's story has been told. But if her children, students, and colleagues weren't sharing her story with us today, it might remain known to only a select few.
Starting in 1951, YY set off on her job hunt. Here she is talking about her interview for an engineering job with a U.S. Navy recruiter.
He looked at me and said, "I don't think I can hire you." I said, "Okay, what's the problem now?" He said, "You are female."
He told her that women were considered bad luck on board a ship. But listen to how YY responded.
I said, "Okay, I tell you what, I'll go on to my next interview and you can finish your paperwork and this can be a plus."
YY's daughter Carol says that in another interview, the recruiter told her,
"We lift things here and, women just can't lift that type of stuff."
YY's response to this was so typical, so engineering. She said,
"You give me a long enough lever and I can take down anything."
YY didn't get that job either, but she always seemed so undaunted by the rejection. She followed a simple but powerful philosophy.
You don't carry other people's baggage.
That's Milton again.
And so not being able to get the job that she was going for, she put on them, not on her. You know, they're missing out on my talent. They're the ones who've decided they don't want me. Fine.
After 2 months of interviews in March of 1952,
I got a job with Frankford Arsenal Gauge Lab, and I was headed for Philadelphia.
once again, YY was a first. According to 6 Degrees of Freedom, she was the first African American and the first woman hired there. Frankford Arsenal was a U.S. Army ammunition plant. It's now defunct, but at the time YY joined, it was focused on designing new weapons.
When she was working at Frankford Arsenal, they had the issue with the cannon.
They were having trouble with a cannon that would jam up in cold weather.
They had had several teams try to fix that thing, and they had all failed. And Mom comes along with her different way of looking at stuff and solved the problem.
In this case, it was quite literally a different way of looking. YY took the plans for the cannon and blew them up to 4 times their original size.
This was long before you could just zoom in with a click or a cursor. It meant painstakingly replicating grid by grid the portion of the plan that showed the cannon's firing mechanism.
And it paid off. With the magnified plans, YY was able to see that 2 pieces of metal in the mechanism were overlapping, causing the jam. YY's problem-solving approach was stunning in its simplicity. She figured, if everyone else is having trouble fixing the thing, they must be looking at it wrong.
Wow, I love that. It's such an insight, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in an interview later, YY said that many of the male engineers she worked with resisted working at the drawing board. She said they were afraid of being seen as mere draftsmen, and that would be too degrading. But YY understood how important it was to take a step back and see clearly before forging ahead.
That, based on my research, set her reputation as being a troubleshooter.
You know, let me just pause here for a sec and say the very idea, the very concept of a troubleshooter sort of implies that you think differently. So what she did is she solved these problems by looking at things differently. And at Frankford Arsenal, she proved herself again and again. And still,
Somebody found out that as an engineer, I was making more than the guys who came up through the ranks. So they got kind of upset, this female making more money than I am, and she just out of college, not even dry behind the ears.
The management told her she could no longer earn overtime. They wanted to make sure she wasn't making too much money because it would upset her male coworkers.
and when she applied for a raise after she'd passed the probationary period, they told her she'd have to wait. The men took priority.
So I went looking for another job.
Looking for a different job was one thing. It was another thing altogether to find one. And after weeks of searching, YY voiced her frustration to Bill.
Bill said, "You're trying to get a seat at a table in a men's-only club, and you need to get through the door first."
Dad was the one who suggested that she go by her initials. Rather than it being Yvonne, make it Y.
The gender-ambiguous initials seemed to work. In the fall of 1952, YY was called for an interview at RCA, the Radio Corporation of America, which had an engineering products department that was headquartered in New Jersey. A few weeks after that interview,
I got a telegram, "Can you report XYZ?" I said, "Yes, I can report." Gave my 2 weeks notice, and I was on RCA's payroll.
6 Degrees of Freedom says YY was the first Black female engineer hired at RCA.
I was the only one, whatever the subject was.
YY was getting pretty used to being the first or the only wherever she was, and she was starting to get recognized for it.
RCA published a newsletter about YY in 1954 that her daughter Carol showed me. The headline is Lady Mechanical Engineer, and the copy reads, "The attractive girl
Worked her way up to a full-fledged engineer in less than 2 years and is now designing electrical equipment for RCA-Victor. Having been the only woman in the Howard engineering class of 300, Miss Young is perfectly at home working with the 18 men in her department. Miss Young is the only Negro member of the American Society of Women Engineers. I know. What do you do?
In many ways, YY was doing really well at RCA. She was lead engineer on several projects. But navigating this working world meant facing a steady stream of patronizing remarks and animosity from colleagues. There were hushed conversations around the water cooler, snarky comments, and PR that focused on how attractive she was. It would have been understandable to feel defeated or enraged. But above all, YY was resilient. She just kept things moving.
Coming up, just as YY is getting her bearings at RCA, she chooses to follow her heart.
This is a main drag for North Nashville.
I'm in Nashville, Tennessee with Milton. He's showing me the house his parents bought back in 1955.
See this house down here and all of these here? This is what lined the whole street.
It's pretty unassuming. One story, red brick, set on a road with a stretch of houses that look just like it.
I haven't been in the house since it's been sold, but I was in there for so long, I could tell you where every knot in the hardwood floor is.
This is where Milton and his sister Carol grew up, about a mile from Tennessee State University, where their mom worked. YY and Bill bought the house when they got engaged. As YY tells it, Bill asked,
"How about a diamond ring?" I said, "My mom and dad gave me for my 18th birthday a diamond, so let's get a house together."
So instead of ring shopping, Bill and YY went house hunting. The problem was, at this point, YY was still working at RCA in New Jersey, and Bill was in Nashville. He'd finished his biochemistry degree and started teaching at Meharry Medical College.
YY had to make a choice. Stay up north, where she'd finally broken into industry, or move back down south, where career prospects were uncertain, in order to build a life with Bill.
YY decided to move to Nashville. In an interview she gave years later, she said, "If I hadn't married that rascal, I probably wouldn't be there now." Since she was still in New Jersey, she told Bill to pick out 2 houses he liked in Nashville.
Because you're going to pick the 2, therefore you are satisfied. When I choose one of your 2, we are satisfied.
And that's how they found the house they lived in for more than 40 years. YY married Bill in December of 1955. It was a big celebration in her hometown, Louisville. News photographers covered the event. Now, all YY had to do was find work in Nashville.
Since I was still in industry, I went by the Ford glass plant.
The Ford Motor Company had plans to open a large glass plant in Nashville, and YY knew it needed engineers. She told her daughter, Carol.
So I go by to see if I can get a job. And they told me, "We have no use for you."
Why did they say that?
A black female down south.
YY was back in the segregated South. She'd faced significant racism and sexism in New Jersey, but the South was another level altogether. This was the 50s. The South was just barely beginning to end legal segregation. The Supreme Court made its ruling on Brown versus Board of Education, the landmark case that outlawed segregation in public schools, in 1954, just a year before YY moved to Nashville. It was met with a furious backlash.
We in the White Citizens Council say now, yesterday, today, and forever, the Supreme Court is not the law of the land. I say integration can be reversed, it can be stopped anywhere.
YY had grown up in an affluent, supportive black community in the South, an enclave in a racist world. But now, with the backlash, things were different. And as much as Brown versus Board of Education had been a civil rights breakthrough, private employers in Nashville and the rest of the South had no obligation to integrate.
So I went down the road a little ways to Tennessee State University.
In spite of her second never become a teacher. With few options in industry, YY applied for a job teaching in Tennessee State's Mechanical Engineering Department. Tennessee State, or TSU, is a historically Black university in Nashville. YY would be working with and for the Black community, and she said she broke another record by getting the job.
I was the first female engineer hired at TSU.
This was 1956.
The engineering building had 2 females, the dean's secretary and myself.
We found the yearbook from YY's first year teaching. On page 82, there's a photograph of the engineering department. It's a grainy scan, but we could just make out YY, the only woman standing in the front row.
When Mom came to the school, there was not a women's bathroom in the engineering building.
The engineering building was practically new, built only about 5 years earlier. But the architects had not anticipated that women would be working in the building at all.
And so she and the secretary would basically watch out for each other, when they needed to go to the bathroom.
YY's first year of teaching was a busy one, and on top of that, she experienced a personal first. Later that year, her son, Milton, who you've been hearing, was born. Although she'd left industry at this point, YY made sure to stay connected with people in her field. She was a member of the Society of Women Engineers, or SWE.
I joined after I finished college in 1952.
SWE had just formed 2 years earlier, and its mission was to advocate for female engineers.
In her application, YY included a headshot so that SWE knew she was a Black woman and they weren't blindsided by her race. She got a call from the SWE president a week later. She was in.
I integrated the Society of Women Engineers.
YY was the first African American to join. She later said, "I'd found a home among peers."
I've been active in SWE really ever since I joined. I would try to always get to convention.
That's YY again. In 2001, when she was in her early 70s, she and a few other SWE members got together to reminisce about their careers. One story really stood out. SWE held an annual convention for its members.
In 58, was it 58 or 57?
It was 57.
The convention met in Houston, Texas.
SWE held its national conference at a hotel in Houston. YY remembers arriving and walking up to the front desk.
And I said, I'm here to attend the Women Engineers Convention, and found out that they wouldn't let me stay there.
The hotel had been told that SWE was an integrated organization, but it turned out the manager of the hotel thought it was just a joke. He said, "Who ever heard of a colored female engineer?" But that very engineer was standing right in front of him, and as usual, she was prepared.
I got everything I'm supposed to have, reservations and everything, and I said, here's my reservation for your hotel with guarantee. And the man reached for I said, no, this is mine, you find yours.
YY held on tightly to her confirmation, proof that she'd booked a room. But to no avail, the hotel wouldn't let her check in. They even tried to prevent her from attending the conference at all.
The kids today just really can't imagine people acting like that.
Patsy Chapelier was one of the organizers of that 1957 SWE convention. She lived in Houston and still does. She remembers what it was like in 1957.
I grew up in a segregated state, in a segregated society. It is so hard to explain to somebody today who wasn't alive back then what the society was like.
When the SWE members heard that YY was being told to leave,
They wanted to pull the convention out of the hotel.
and not only that, SWE's president threatened to sue the hotel and tell every newspaper about the incident.
And I said, no. It takes time to get a convention, national convention, moving smoothly. and I wouldn't let them pull it now on my account.
YY appreciated that Sui would go to bat for her.
She was very polite and, didn't want to cause a problem, but we were very determined that she came to town to go to the convention, that she was going to go to the convention. So we did it.
They considered booking her a room somewhere else.
They sent me over to the hotel, recommended a segregated hotel.
But remember, this is in Houston, where YY's family, the Houstons, had so much history.
And that's when I called my aunt. I said, I'm here, but don't have a place to stay right now. She said, okay, I'll come get you.
Sui and YY worked out a deal with the hotel. YY would be able to attend the conference and would be refunded the cost of her room, but she would stay with her aunt and uncle.
They would drive her to the convention in the morning, and we would meet her there, 8 o'clock or so.
Still, the hotel insisted that while YY was there, she had to be, quote, chaperoned.
I had to be accompanied at all times, from the front door back to the front door.
They wanted to make it clear that this black woman on the premises was not staying at the hotel.
She had to be escorted every place, to the restroom. She could not be left alone while we were on the convention floor. And it did upset everybody.
But YY had a different take on that experience. As she told her colleagues from SWE in 2001,
we had a ball. Anytime anybody wanted some cigarettes, they came and found me and we walked. So I've been to the newsstand and coffee shop. We went everywhere that 1 week. Mm-hmm. We had a ball.
YY made her presence as known as possible. She delighted in exposing the absurdity of the hotel's racist demand. It's a perfect example of how YY dealt with the discrimination she faced. As she put it,
if you roll with the punches and don't wear other people's problems, you can make it with a smile. But when you start worrying about other people and their problems, it hurts you.
After the 1957 conference, the SWE Executive Committee made a statement that SWE would not hold conventions in the southern United States until the Civil Rights Act was passed.
The organization didn't go south until all the members were protected.
In 1997, SWE finally returned to Houston. This time, YY received a plaque, a key to the city, and an apology for her treatment in 1957. And she was honored as SWE's Distinguished Engineering Educator.
Next time on Lost Women of Science, YY breaks her third never. Never work for the government.
The government was always looking for the best and brightest. Mom had established herself as being one of that crew.
My assignment was to help design the box that brings the samples, the rocks, back from the moon.
This has been Lost Women of Science. Thanks to everyone who made this initiative happen, including our co-executive producer Amy Sharf, producer Ashreya Gupta, senior editor Nora Matheson, associate producer Sindhuja Srinivasan, composer Elizabeth Yunin, and the engineers at Studio D Podcast Production.
Thank you to Milton H. Clark Sr. Much of the story comes from his book, 6 Degrees of Freedom.
We're grateful to Mike Fung, Kathy Bennett Warner, Dominique Guilford, Jeff Delvicio, Maria Clave, Michelle Nyhouse, Susan Kerr, Jeannie Stivers, Carol Lawson, and our interns, Hilda Gitchell and Hannah Carroll. Thanks also to Paula Goodwin, Nicole Searing, and the rest of the legal team at Perkins Coie. Many thanks to Barnard College, a leader in empowering young women to pursue their passion in STEM.
Thank you to Tennessee State University, the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, the University of Louisville, and the University of Alabama in Huntsville for helping us with our search. And a special shout out to the print shop on Martha's Vineyard.
And my closet, where this podcast was recorded. Lost Women of Science is funded in part by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation and the John Templeton Foundation, which catalyzes conversations about living purposeful and meaningful lives. This podcast is distributed by PRX and published in partnership with Scientific American. You can learn more about our initiative at lostwomenofscience.org or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Find us at Lost Women of Sci. That's Lost Women of SCI. Thank you so much for listening.
I'm Carol Sutton Lewis.
And I'm Katie Hafner.
From PRX.